Come close now, not merely to hear my voice, but to feel the rhythm beneath it, the silent music of the psyche. There is something you already sense, though perhaps you have not yet found words for it. It lives in your breath, just beneath the story you tell yourself. You know, somehow, that a turning point has occurred, not loud, not celebrated, but profound in its quietness. Something has shifted, something has ended, and in that silent ending, you have won. But let us be careful with the language of winning, for this is not the victory of ego over ego. It is not the conquest of another soul. You have not triumphed in order to dominate. You have not overcome the narcissist to shame them. Your victory is a psychic liberation. You have stepped out of the unconscious dance, and that by its very nature is a rupture in the archetypal cycle. It is not a moment the world applauds, but it is the moment the soul exhales. To defeat the narcissist is to defeat within yourself the magnetic pull toward illusion. The narcissist is not merely a person. They are an embodied pattern, an archetypal force. They are the mask that refuses to crack, the voice that mimics but does not echo, the gaze that penetrates without perceiving. The narcissist feeds on reflection, but not the sacred kind that nourishes. They feed on projected identity, on the energy of the unformed, on the vitality of those still in search of their own center. And so, when they first meet you, they do not see you. They scan you, not for who you are, but for what you carry, your light, your longing, your openness, your empathic wound. They smell it like hunger, smells bread. And the dance begins, but there is something within you, always, that resists. At first, it is subtle. Hésitation, qui est discontent. A dream that unsettles you. A word they speak that twists your stomach, even if it flatters your mind. These are the early whispers of the self. The self does not shout. It does not argue with the persona. It waits, and in your case, it waited until the suffering became unbearable. You see, when you are entangled with a narcissist, suffering often wears the disguise of confusion. You begin to question yourself, fragment your knowing, apologize for your instincts. You start to betray your soul in exchange for the illusion of closeness. But the soul, though patient, is not passive. It begins to withdraw energy from the performance. You feel tired, anxious, lost. You think you are breaking, but you are waking. And that is when the narcissist begins to lose, not because you confront them, not because you scream truth into their false face, but because something inside you refuses to play. A refusal, at first barely perceptible, begins to bloom. A holy indifference emerges. Not cruelty, not revenge, just a profound and sovereign statement of the self. No more. This no more is not always spoken aloud. Often it is internal, quiet, but énergétique. It is when you stop defending your reality to someone committed to misunderstanding it. It is when you begin to believe your own perception again. It is when you hold your boundaries even when it costs you love. It is when your nervous system no longer feels addicted to chaos. These, dear listener, are the invisible victories. The signs that you have defeated the narcissist without even knowing it, and they will feel it. They always do, because the narcissist does not fear confrontation. They feed on it. What they fear is disconnection, silence, indifference, sovereignty. When they can no longer provoke a reaction, they begin to unravel, not because you took their power, but because they never had power of their own. They were borrowing yours. And now the source has gone dark. You may think, but I did not expose them. I did not make them pay. But again, let me remind you, this is not about revenge. It is about release. Exposure may satisfy the ego, but release nourishes the soul. The narcissist's punishment is not your responsibility. Their true punishment is having to live inside the hollow chamber they call a self. Their suffering is not yours to witness. Yours is to leave, and when you leave, not just physically, but psychically, you reclaim the pieces of yourself that were scattered during the entanglement. You retrieve the voice you gave up, the instincts you doubted, the dreams you silenced. Slowly, gently, you gather them, and they do not come back as they were. They come back transfigured, alchemized by suffering, baptized by betrayal. They are no longer fragments. They are gold. This is the process of individuation. It is not linear. It is not glamorous, but it is sacred. You become less concerned with being right and more devoted to being whole. You no longer explain yourself to those who weaponize misunderstanding. You no longer seek to prove your worth. You realize that the moment you stop needing their approval, you won. But there is more. This victory, this psychic shift, changes your attraction. Where once you were magnetized to chaos, now you are drawn to peace. Where once manipulation felt familiar, now it stings. You begin to notice the subtle cues, the flattery laced with dominance, the compliments that feel like contracts, the attention that comes with invisible strings. You notice and you walk away before the hook is set. That is a sign you've defeated the narcissist archetype, not just outside you, but within you, because let us be honest, there is a narcissist within each of us, not the caricature, but the part that performs, the part that pleases to be loved, the part that hides truth to avoid abandonment, the part that seduces rather than reveals. This inner narcissist is not evil, it is wounded. And once we defeat the outer one, we must meet this inner one with compassion, not to indulge it, but to integrate it. You say to it, you were trying to protect me, but we no longer need to perform to survive. And it softens. This is the unseen culmination of your victory. When you can love the parts of yourself that you once disowned because they reminded you too much of the one who hurt you, you know you are free. You are no longer ruled by projection. You are no longer in a reactive trance. You are now the center of your own field. And in this center, something even more miraculous begins. You begin to feel joy, not the manic joy of performance, but the deep, still joy of being. You laugh not because someone approves, but because life is absurd and beautiful. You love not to be chosen, but because your heart cannot help it. You create not to be seen, but because the soul is always making, this is the state the narcissist cannot reach. This is the terrain they cannot understand. And that, my dear soul, is the final sign that you have won. You no longer want to be them. You no longer need to fix them. You no longer see them as a mystery. You see them as they are lost, afraid, chasing mirrors in a house without doors. And you have found the door, and you have walked through it. You may not even realize when it happened. It was subtle, it was quiet, but it was real. You won, and the rest of your life will be the proof. The psyche is not linear. It does not heal by calendar or checklist. It heals in spirals, in returns. Innate choice. You may think the moment you walked away was the moment you were free, but freedom rarely announces itself with fireworks. It slips in like dawn, quiet, disorienting, soft, and before you realize it, the sky inside you has changed color. You begin to wake up differently. The ache is still there, perhaps, but it has lost its command. The voice that used to tell you you are not enough now feels like a faint whisper in another room, still audible, but no longer credible. You no longer chase apologies. You no longer hunger for closure. And in that strange stillness, you mistake yourself for numb, but you are not numb. You are healed. This is one of the paradoxes of psychic liberation. You expect fanfare. Instead, you find emptiness. But this emptiness is not void. It is space, sacred space. Space for something new to emerge. A self unentangelled, a soul uncontracted. You may feel guilty. The narcissist trained you to believe that distance equals cruelty. That silence is punishment. That peace is betrayal. But what they could never tolerate, what they always feared, was your centeredness, because in your center, you are no longer accessible, not in the way they knew you. You are no longer hooked by their words, their moods, their manipulations. You do not orbit their approval. You do not tremble in their storms. You have become an unmoved mover. That is the archetype of the inner sage. And it only awakens when you stop needing to win the game. It stirs when you say, I would rather be whole than be right. I would rather be free than be liked. This is a seismic shift. It does not make you louder. It makes you clearer. Clarity is the weapon. The narcissist cannot fight because clarity is not combative. It does not explain. It does not apologize. It does not perform. It simply is. It stands like a mountain while the wind tries to negotiate. The narcissist depends on distortion. They weave confusion like a spell. They need you to doubt your own mirror. And once you stop handing them the brush, they are left staring at the canvas. They cannot touch. And so they fall away, sometimes abruptly, sometimes slowly. Sometimes they try again, testing the locks on doors they used to walk through. But when they find the door no longer answers, when they knock and receive nothing but silence, something inside them shatters. Not because you were cruel, but because you were absent, not in body, but in energy. You have reclaimed your projection. You have retrieved the light you once poured into their abyss. You have stopped bleeding into someone else's void, and The moment you do this truly, somatically, you collapse the fantasy. The narcissist does not know how to love, but they do know how to possess, and you have become unpossessable. This is what liberation looks like. Not defiance, not rage, stillness, sacred disinterest, the refusal to carry what was never yours. It is in this stillness that you meet the deeper layers of your own shadow. Not the obvious ones, but the subtle ones, the parts of you that enjoyed being needed, that enjoyed being the savior, that enjoyed the thrill of emotional chaos, the validation of being the good one. You must meet these parts without shame. You must welcome them back into the circle, not to indulge them, but to integrate them. You say, thank you for protecting me. But we don't need that anymore. And these parts soften. They sit beside you like old guardians relieved of their post, because now you are becoming sovereign. You no longer outsource your safety. You no longer bargain for love. You no longer audition for belonging. You simply are. This is the state of psychic adulthood. It does not mean you are invulnerable. It means your vulnerability is no longer a liability. It is an offering. And only those who can honor it are invited into your space. That is one of the most profound signs you have defeated the narcissist. You no longer attract them, not because they no longer exist, but because you no longer emit the frequency that invites them in. It is subtle, but the psyche knows the wounded child within you, who once begged to be chosen, who once mistook chaos for connection, who once called abuse passion. That child has been met, held, loved, not by the narcissist, by you. And that reparenting changes everything. Now, when someone offers you red flags wrapped in charm, your body says no before your mind has time to explain. Your cells remember, your dreams reveal, your boundaries speak. This is not hypervigilance, this is embodiment. You are no longer guarding against pain. You are simply aligned with truth. And truth, by its nature, is discerning. You begin to speak differently, not defensively, but cleanly. You no longer try to convince others of your goodness. You know who you are. You no longer shrink when misunderstood. You bless the misunderstanding and walk away. This is not indifference, it is sacred detachment. And from this place, something new begins to grow. Joy, not the joy of approval, but the joy of aliveness. You begin to feel life again, not through the highs and lows of drama, but through the subtle beauty of being present, the light in the leaves, the quiet in the morning, the sound of your own laughter, uncoiled from anxiety, the peace of waking up without wondering who you need to become today to be loved. That is victory, unannounced, uncelebrated, and undeniable. You do not need a certificate. You do not need closure. You do not need them to say you were right. Because you know now, in your marrow, you were never the broken one. You were the awake one. And they feared that because in your awakening, you reminded them of everything they had exiled within themselves. And that is why they tried to silence you, diminish you, distract you. But you endured, you felt it all, you stayed with the fire, you let it burn away the illusion. And now you sit in the ashes not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a soul remembering its name. You did not win by defeating them. You won by remembering yourself. And that, my beloved listener, is a triumph few will see, but one that changes everything. There is a silence that is not absence, but arrival. You begin to hear it after the storms, after the endless unraveling of illusion, after the voices that once hijacked your inner world fade into distant echoes. This silence does not ask for attention. It offers presence, and in its stillness, you finally meet the one you've been running from, not the narcissist, but yourself. You sit across from your own soul, not the part that performs, not the part that pleases, not the part that survives, but the part that remembers, the one who was never fooled, never broken, never seduced, the self, the silent observer who watched it all unfold, the entanglement, the confusion, the dance of projection and betrayal, and who never left you. Even as you abandoned yourself to chase love through the labyrinth of illusion, you may weep here, not from pain, but from the ache of reunion, because you realize how long it has been, how long you have lived outside of yourself, how long you have outsourced your value, how long you have spoken in languages that betrayed your native tongue. The soul speaks in silence, in symbol, in sensation, but in the narcissist world, those are forbidden. They fear silence because it reveals. They fear symbols because they transcend words. They fear sensations because they cannot control the body of another soul awakened to its own truth. But you no longer fear these things. You welcome the silence, now not as punishment, but as prayer. You read symbols like sacred text. Your dreams no longer torment, they guide, and your body, it begins to thaw, to release, to return, because it knows you're listening now. This is not a psychological recovery. It is a sacred restoration. The temple of your being was not destroyed. It was desecrated, and now, stone by stone, you rebuild it, not by rushing, not by pretending it never happened, but by honoring the truth of what it. You do not bypass the wound, you bow before it. You place your hand on your chest and say, yes, it happened, and I am still here. This is the moment your timeline splits. In the psyche, this is the albedo stage, the whitening after the blackening, the clarity after confusion, the dawning of new perception. You begin to notice the beauty that was always there, but hidden behind survival. You taste food more deeply, you move more slowly, you speak with more care. Not because you are trying to impress, but because you are present. And presence is power. The narcissist had power over you, but now you have power within. This power is quiet. It does not dominate, it radiates, it does not scream, it shifts atmospheres, it does not control, it creates. You do not need to win arguments anymore. You do not need to be understood. You do not need to plead for recognition, because you recognize yourself. And that recognition fills you in places that once felt hollow. People begin to notice, though they cannot always name it. Some will draw closer, others will flee, because your presence now exposes, not through accusation, but through vibration. You are no longer a mirror of illusion, you are a mirror of truth. And truth when held with compassion, is the most potent medicine in the world. But it will disrupt the ones still clinging to the lie. Let them be disrupted. That is not your concern. Your task now is to remain faithful to your inner rhythm, to stay close to the soul. And the soul will speak in moments you least expect, while washing dishes, while walking alone, while resting your hand on your heart after a long day. It will whisper truths not taught in textbooks. It will reveal insights that cannot be proven but known. It will give you dreams, not just of what was, but of what's becoming. The dreams will change, no longer filled with chase and terror, but with symbols of integration. You may dream of returning to old places, but now you walk freely. You may see the narcissist again, not as a monster, but as a shadow in retreat. You may dream of water, of birds, of rooms once locked, now opening. These are not accidents. They are signs. The unconscious is confirming your shift. You are no longer possessed by the pattern. You are partnered with the self, and now something new becomes possible. Creation, not reaction, not survival, but through creation you begin to make art again. You begin to write what you were afraid to write. You begin to speak with a voice you had buried beneath politeness. You begin to love, not recklessly, but consciously, not as a rescuer, not as a martyr, but as a sovereign soul. You begin to dream forward, and you do so without waiting for permission. That is a sign the narcissist no longer owns a room inside your mind, because they trained you to wait for their praise, their punishment, their permission to live. And now you do not wait. You choose. You move. You allow yourself to exist outside their gaze. And this, perhaps, is the final rupture. They cannot follow you here. You have stepped out of the dream. You have exited the archetype. You are no longer their reflection. You are your own flame. You have crossed the threshold, and now everything you once feared becomes something you can face. Not because it disappeared, but because you are no longer looking at it through the eyes of the fragmented self, the self that sought to be loved before it dared to exist, the self that bent, that danced, that swallowed itself just to stay near the fire. You don't need that fire anymore. You've become your own. This is the final sign that you've defeated the narcissist, not by destroying them, but by ceasing to internalize them. They no longer live in your nervous system. You no longer brace at every silence. You no longer scan for threat in the smile. You no longer read between lines trying to decode invisible rules that only shift to trap you. You've stopped playing the game because you've remembered it was never a game you agreed to. You were born for something far more ancient, far more sacred authenticity. That primordial alignment between soul and self that cannot be manufactured, controlled or stolen. It must be lived slowly, deliberately, dangerously. Because to be real in this world is to threaten everything false. And so now you find yourself walking differently, not arrogantly, but grounded. You speak differently, not to impress, but to reveal. You listen not to respond, but to understand. Your presence becomes a disruption to systems built on denial. Your silence begins to speak more loudly than your past protests ever could. This does not mean life is now without pain, but it is pain with meaning. And that is the great shift. You see, the narcissist taught you pain with no meaning. Pain that loops, pain that gaslights itself, pain that pretends to be love. But now, when pain arises, you stay, you feel, you breathe. You hold it without abandoning yourself. And the pain becomes passage, a holy descent, a deepening, a renewal. This is the work of the soul. And it radiates into the world, often without your knowing. People will begin to tell you, you feel safe. There's something about your energy. I feel seen when I'm around you. These are not compliments. They are recognitions, because once you defeat the narcissist, especially the one within you, become a vessel for the sacred to re-enter the world, you become someone who does not flinch at another's pain. You become someone who does not need to dominate to feel worthy. You become someone who can hold space not as a performance, but as presence. That is rare, that is holy, that is powerful. And so, dear soul, your journey does not end in silence. It begins there. The silence that once felt like exile becomes your sanctuary. You begin to dwell in the self, not occasionally, not in moments of retreat, but in the everyday, in the way you pour your tea, in the way you say no with kindness, in the way you ask for what you need, in the way you walk away without burning the bridge, but without looking back. You begin to trust again, not blindly, but wisely. You trust the small voice again, the one that never screamed, the one that waited beneath the wreckage, the one that said, even in your darkest hour, this is not the end. It wasn't. It was the beginning. The narcissist may have written a chapter in your story, but they do not hold the pen. You do. You always have. And now the ink has changed. It no longer runs with fear. It runs with fire. And what you write now will not be a repetition of the past. It will be a new myth, a new language, a new inheritance for the ones who come after you. Because, yes, others will walk where you have walked. Others will fall into the spell. Others will ask, how do I get out? And when they do, you will not need to preach. You will only need to stand. Your freedom will be their invitation. Your clarity will be their compass. Your boundaries will be their map. You are not just healing for yourself. You are healing the pattern. You are ending the loop. You are collapsing the illusion that says we must lose ourselves to be loved. You are embodying a new paradigm. And that, my beloved soul, is what it means to win without knowing. You win not in courtrooms or confrontations. You win when your dreams stop chasing ghosts. You win when you no longer need them to understand. You win when you sit at the table of your own becoming and feast without asking who else is hungry. You win when the narcissist becomes irrelevant, not as vengeance, but as evolution. You win when your life becomes sacred again. And it is now, always, even here, even after all you've endured, especially because of what you endured, because some victories are not seen, they are lived. You are living it now. And may your life never again belong to anyone who cannot see your light without trying to dim it. You have defeated the narcissist. You have remembered yourself. You have returned. And we, those who see you, those who have walked this path beside you, even in silence, we welcome you home, not to who you were, but to who you are.